NFL Conference Championship Week is upon us, arguably the best Sunday of the season on tap. So we'll break it down from a betting point of view with arguably the best in the business. Rob Pizzola is a professional sports bettor, co-founder and CEO of the Hammer Betting Network, co-owner of BetStamp, and the host of Circles Off and Forward Progress for Good Measure. On the platform formerly known as Twitter, you can follow him at Rob Pizzola. Rob, it's been a minute. Welcome back to Props and Hops.
Yeah, good to be back, Matt. Obviously, I'm looking forward to these games this weekend. Pretty excited about it. I think we got some really good matchups, so I'm ready.
Speaking of the matchups we've got in store, let's dive right into the NFC Championship game. First up on Sunday, Washington at Philadelphia. Eagles currently favored by 6, total 47.5. And Rob, is a starting point for this game, I'll note that in last week's episode, when I had Ed Fang on the show, I described Washington as a horseshoe, a rabbit's foot, and a four-leaf clover all in one. And this was before they went +5 in turnovers, 3 for 4 on fourth downs, and 4 for 4 in the red zone, en route to a 2-touchdown upset win at Detroit, despite getting outgained by more than a yard per play. At this point, I feel like I'm at a loss, and it's not because Jaden Daniels, Dan Quinn and company don't also deserve plenty of praise for the skill behind their stellar season, but I feel like this amount of continued good fortune, along with the skill that they've demonstrated, exceeds anything I can recall. So based on that framework, Rob, how would you describe what you make of Washington as a bona fide NFC title game team?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because certainly they've caught in a lot of breaks. +5 turnover margin, as you mentioned last week, that's certainly not something you're going to rely on or is repeatable going forwards. I know it's been talked about ad nauseum in the last month or so about their conversion rates on late downs relative to early downs as well, and all of these factors. But at the end of the day, they have arguably a top 5 quarterback in the NFL right now. I mean, you can say you can debate Herbert versus Daniels in that 5 spot, but top 5 or top 6 quarterback. And ultimately, that's going to help you win games. And in some instances, I would probably disagree with the amount of luck that is being perceived as this team having. So the late down stuff, for instance, I'm not saying that it can't be a product of luck, but I like to approach all of these situations independent of one another, right? And really, we don't know how much emphasis the coaching staff puts on practicing short yardage situations in practice over the course of the year, over the practice throughout the week, those types of situations. It seems very clear to me that you have a very mobile quarterback, dual threat quarterback who kind of thrives in these types of situations, very good play calling, and they're working towards just getting those third and manageables, fourth and manageables. It has been a strategy that they have employed this year with a lot of success. I mean, are they overperforming relative to expectation? Sure. Is it going to come crashing down to earth in one specific game? No, I probably think it would be balanced over a longer period of time. So that Washington has been an enigma for me all year for that reason, and also because of Jaden Daniels nursing an injury midseason as well, and how that has hurt their season-long metrics when you take a step back and you pull out games where potentially Daniels was injured. I mean, Washington looks a lot better on paper. And then just to add to the uncertainty mix for this game, well, you've got a quarterback injury on the other side as well. And you got the market that's valuing Philadelphia as essentially having a quarterback that's going to be at 100% in this game. And we have no idea whether that's true or not. So there's a lot of moving pieces when it comes to Commanders and Eagles.
And you touched on it. A couple of things I'll follow up on there. One, just because Washington has been lucky, you could argue, doesn't mean it's all going to come crashing down to earth in one game. And that point you just made about Jalen Hurts being priced as if he's about 100%. I did want to get into the other side of this equation and note that while the Eagles are no stranger to NFC Championship game appearances, they're dealing with compromised key cogs on both sides of the ball beyond just Jalen Hurts. A.J. Brown also playing through a knee injury on offense. And then defensively, the back seven lost linebacker Nakobe Dean for the rest of the playoffs in the wild card round. In the divisional round, they lost cornerback It's Quinyon Mitchell, right? Not Quentin. Quentin Johnston is the bane of my existence as a Chargers fan, but we'll go with Quinyon Mitchell as a better player on the perimeter for the Eagles here, nursing a shoulder injury. I feel like Mitchell, like Hurts and Brown, gonna play, but play through injury here. And my experience is that betting markets tend to skew toward a binary in or out, assuming a player who's in is in at 100%. And like you touched on, we can pretty safely anticipate that Hurts, Brown, and Mitchell won't be too close to 100% come Sunday. So elaborate a bit as to how this affects your handicap looking at the Eagles side of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple for me right now, Matt. I would not bet the Eagles at current market price with these unknowns. And we don't get any new information today because the Eagles basically ran a walkthrough practice. That's sometimes very typical for teams to run on Wednesdays where they just kind of give everyone a rest day and then they put together an injury report and they listed all these guys as limited practice. So we don't get any additional information. But if we go back to last week, Jalen Hurts gets hurt in the third quarter, leaves, goes in the medical tent. They put a knee brace on him. He comes back into the game. He looks very immobile. They call some 5 and 7 step drops for him. One results in a safety where, he couldn't do anything in that type of position. They refuse to run a tush push with him. Like, it's very clear that he is injured. Now, to what extent, we don't know, and it's only a 1-week recovery. But I would say this is not a good situation because Hurts is very reliant on his mobility. He's not the best pocket passer in the world. He rolls to his right a lot. He is more dangerous when he's in space. You lose that, you potentially lose your short yardage play. That's an automatic first down if he can't recover from that. That to me is substantial. Quinyon Mitchell leaves in the first quarter last week, and he says after the game, I'm going to be fine for next week. Don't worry about me. He was unable to return to that game at any point. That was a do or die game in the playoffs, and he was unable to return. That shoulder injury, who knows how that's going to hold up in game? I mean, there's obviously a live betting angle there as well if he goes out and looking at Terry McLaurin overs in those types of situations. But there's that. Nakobe Dean, a very, very good run-stopping linebacker. And not the best in pass coverage, but you notice when he left last week, the Rams are attacking the middle of the field where Nakobe Dean usually occupies, and they're doing it with great success. So I think that these are very impactful. And I understand Washington this line opened 4.5. And a lot of people looked at this and they're like, this makes no sense. I mean, the Eagles were minus 4.5 at Washington. How's this going to be minus 4.5 at Philadelphia? But now it's gotten to the point where, yeah, this is a fair price if you assume healthiness for everyone on Philly. And I mean, I think there's significant downside there. So more to be seen as the week goes on. But these are, people I think are dismissing these as non-impactful just because guys are trending towards playing. And I like the point you made about the binary outcome and how people just assume, well, they're 100%. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be a wet blanket here. I think these are two teams that are in the NFC title game, and there's plenty to celebrate about that. So if I say, oh, Washington's gotten lucky or the Eagles are banged up, that doesn't necessarily take too much luster away from this matchup, but it might muddy the picture a bit in terms of what to bet, especially when we're looking at point spreads, full game totals being at their apex in terms of market efficiency this late in the season. So, Rob, I've got a couple of prop betting angles I want to run by you for this game. One of them builds on what you've touched on with Jalen Hurts, and this might be the obvious one, but a look at least at his rushing yards toward the under. There's an obvious discount here based on his knee injury. He closed in the high 30s, low 40s in both the wild card and divisional rounds. He's lined in the high 20s or low 30s for Conference Championship Sunday. That said, I'm not sure if it's enough of a discount, and two factors that could be propping this lineup just a bit too much. One, some recency bias. Hurts did get injured last week, but he also ripped off a 44-yard touchdown run on the Eagles' opening drive and finished with 70 rushing yards in the game. So if people know about the injury, but they remember that highlight reel play to start the game or just look at the box score, they might lose sight of the reality of this situation. And two, with the Eagles being a clear favorite here, again, reason to think that it's not a shoo-in, but the Eagles are a clear favorite, and that opens the door to kneel downs that would count against Hurts's rushing yardage output. So with those factors in mind, how would you describe your thoughts on a look toward Hurts rushing yardage under? Let's say we would consider grading this at the widely available 29.5.
Yeah, so I think that's a very viable angle. Definitely like to look at the actual player that's injured and towards his unders, and then start to look at how that injury could potentially impact the game. I do like to attack a lot of these in live markets, to be completely honest, because I like to have the actual visibility as to how things look on the first drive or two drives of the game, because sometimes I'm not the biggest fan of just pure speculation. But to me, that's a good look. You would imagine if Hurts is injured, that Washington really commits to trying to stop Saquon Barkley at all costs. I mean, he has a very high rushing yardage number this week. It is quite high, but you would imagine that they try to turn Hurts into a pocket passer. And if you actually look at the previous matchups between these two teams, it looks like Saquon Barkley went off in those games. He actually didn't. If you look at the Eagles' success rate running the ball in those games, is actually way below their seasonal average. He just broke off a big run in both of those games that really skews the numbers. So I like your look. And then I just start to think of like the derivatives in my head of what would this mean to the game plan on offense. And I mean, I don't know that I'm going to click Barkley under 131.5. I mean, it's scary, but that to me is the secondary look in this type of situation.
Yeah, and I'd love to get to Barkley in a moment because I think we're looking at it similarly there. But when it comes to Hurts, if somebody doesn't want to risk a flat minus 115 on what seems like a discounted rushing yardage output, I also do wonder about the notion of a same game parlay alternative where you could still take Hurts under his rushing yardage total and pair it with the yes for an anytime touchdown. I last saw that at plus 282 at FanDuel. And there's an inverse correlation here, obviously thinking if Hurts scores a touchdown, like we saw last week, it could be a long touchdown that would lead to him going over his rushing yardage total. But especially with the brotherly shove in Philadelphia's arsenal, I think a 1 yard touchdown is a viable possibility that covers one leg of this parlay with a minimal impact on the other. And I heard you mention they didn't run it last week after the injury. If I recall correctly, they did run it and it was successful for a touchdown, but it got called back because of a false start. So we're not going to see that in the box score. So that might be concealing a bit of the edge I see in this inverse correlation as well. Any thoughts on Hurts, not just to go under his rushing yardage output, but also to do so while scoring a touchdown if we look at a bigger payout in the range of plus 282?
Yeah, I love looks like that. Like it's just, people can't wrap their head around both of these things happening in the same type of game because they're always looking for the correlated outcome. But this one makes a lot of sense in the sense that he probably gets less rushing attempts in total. But if they were going to utilize him, it would be in a high leverage situation where they just need to pick up a yard. So I like that. And I'm actually going to bet that, Matt, because I like the look so much.
All right, I might have to see if I can get down on it myself through some friends I know in faraway places that could help me with that FanDuel line as we're recording this show. Next time I have you speaking for a moment or two. But you did also touch on Saquon Barkley, and this is going to be scary. I think if I look at a widely available price that anybody could bet right now if they wanted to, you could take him under 125.5. You mentioned seeing as high as 131.5, and that is just a stratosphere we rarely see, especially in the playoffs where defenses tend to be better. Of course, Barkley is wont to break off long runs, so down-to-down success doesn't guarantee anything here. This is a scary proposition, stepping in front of a runaway train. I don't want to avoid that, but I feel like if Washington's defense doesn't think it has to allocate as much to containing Hurts on the ground and perhaps A.J. Brown through the air, this Barkley price could be a bit inflated after he closed 105.5 or so in the wild card round and 115.5 or so just last week. So you hinted at it a bit earlier. Is this just something piquing your curiosity, or is there anything you're monitoring to decide whether or not to actually go ahead and pull the trigger, stepping in front of the Saquon train between now and kickoff?
No, it definitely is. I'm not just bringing it up for the sake of bringing it up. I do have genuine interest in betting the under. You're right, Matt. At 129.5 is best in market right now, no longer 131.5. But yeah, this is just, again, I think this is correlated with Hurts. If you think Hurts is not at 100%, and I think the Commanders will probably go into this game thinking that or game planning that way, the emphasis just goes on shutting down the Eagles' running game and forcing Hurts to hit his wide receivers on the outside. That's the way that they attack it, in my opinion. So I think that there's a genuine rationale for that. And I think that's a really good look. I mean, similarly on the other side of things too, Austin Eckler's really come on in recent weeks, just because we're sticking with running backs here and it's top of mind. But Austin Eckler has some 21 and a halves out there in the receiving yardage. I mean, the most of the market's at 23 and a half, 24 and a half right now. But again, what do the Eagles do well? They have really good cover corners. They probably will limit Washington's wide receivers. Jaden Daniels is likely looking to secondary options in this game. Eckler went 4 for 41 against the Lions last week. He's been way more heavily involved on third downs. Brian Robinson just hasn't been that guy, especially as a pass catcher. You have a scenario here where Washington is getting 6. They're likely going to be in a trailing game state at some point. Eckler's the passing guy. I think that receiving yardage number is too low on the Washington side as well.
Got it. I love the preparation, especially for a podcast with props in the title. So appreciate the look at Eckler in addition to something out of the Philadelphia backfield. And I feel like if we're a little unsure of what may or may not be bettable as far as the NFC title game, point spread and total are concerned, that's a lot of good food for thought in the prop betting market. So at this point, let's go ahead and turn the page to the AFC title game. Buffalo at Kansas City, Chiefs laying 2, total 47.5. Last week, when I teed up the Chiefs game to Ed, I speculated on a Kansas City playoff bump. I don't think we saw it. Despite their win and cover, the Chiefs were outgained by a full yard per play. They were the beneficiary of multiple highly questionable penalty calls on the Houston defense, trying to contain Patrick Mahomes, that contributed to Kansas City scoring drives. This is more of a narrative than I typically care to give oxygen. But Rob, how much untapped potential do you see for Kansas City this week compared to the body of work so far this season?
I think it's fairly high just because I'm not the biggest believer in the Bills defense as a whole and haven't been for a lot of this year. There are some similarities in that the Bills have some good edge rushers. Obviously, Greg Rousseau, Von Miller are very good edge rushers, and that was where the Texans really did their damage last week. There was plenty of times where the tackle situation for KC, Joe Thuney, and Jawan Taylor just did not hold up in that particular game. So you do have that going for you with the Buffalo Bills. But the problem is the Bills have just been giving up a lot of yardage this year and allowing teams to methodically work down the field. If you actually strip out turnovers from the Bills' EPA, they become a bottom 5 EPA team in the league. Now, you don't want to strip out every turnover because some of them the defense is actually creating. I think the Bills coaching staff is really coaching the defensive players to go after the ball. You're watching them try to punch on pretty much every single tackle that's happening. So there's, again, not entire luck there, but they have been moved on quite regularly this season. Teams are getting into the red zone against them. And when you look at the one team that, pretty consistently is able to march down the field against lesser defenses, like success rate them to death, that is basically what the Chiefs have done this year. And they did that for most of the year without Hollywood Brown and without Isaiah Pacheco, who are now back in the mix. So I don't want to call it like a get right game. I don't like using that term, but I think the Houston defense posed a much bigger set of problems for Kansas City, especially with DeMeco Ryans, a very intelligent defensive head coach, versus what Buffalo will be able to give them this week. So I do expect a much better performance out of the Chiefs offense. I think that they have the personnel to really methodically move down the field against Buffalo.
And one reason the Chiefs may have a bigger leg up than some people may be assuming at this point would be that the Bills were not to be outdone by Kansas City, winning despite a yards per play deficit of 1 last week. The Bills minus 2.7 yards per play in their win over Baltimore, aided, of course, by 3 turnovers and that crucial dropped 2-point conversion by Mark Andrews. Now, the Bills did a lot right last week, especially in a dominant first half, but we didn't see their ceiling over the course of a full game. If they reach that ceiling for a full 60 minutes this week, Rob, how do you think that stacks up against what the Chiefs can do?
I mean, it could be very high as well. I mean, you look at previous playoff games between these two teams, it's not like Josh Allen's been held in check by the Chiefs. He's actually had some pretty big performances in those games. It's just that the Chiefs have found a way to get it done. You look at the matchup last year, and there was several drops for the Bills in that game. All the talk was they got to, fix their receiving core. They've brought in, they drafted Keon Coleman, Amari Cooper. I don't know that they've necessarily fixed it, but there has been some luck attributed to the Chiefs in those close games. The Bills can score on them. It's just a question of, can they overcome this team that consistently finds ways to pull out these close type of games? I definitely would say the Bills got lucky last week. I mean, it's not just the three turnovers. It's the way that they happened, right? Like Lamar way overthrew a player downfield. It's not like the Bills had to create that turnover. Lamar, I don't know, he like casually held the ball like it was a loaf of bread on one play and fumbled it. Mark Andrews, he took like a really weird route when he fumbled that ball. He could have easily cut it upfield. It was, and that's kind of how the Bills have lived this year. It's been those types of things that have changed games for them. I mean, the Chiefs haven't turned the ball over in 8 games. So it's really going to be on the Bills offense to move the ball. Now, they can do it. I do think the Chiefs run defense is a little bit overrated, and the Bills run game is been pretty consistently good for them this year, including the first matchup against the Chiefs. I know that the Chiefs have their full complement of weapons in the secondary now, but it really didn't look all that succinct last week, even against a very mediocre Houston passing offense. So the opportunity is certainly there for Buffalo. I mean, I look at the total in this game. I talked about this on one of my live streams this week. I thought it was a little bit low for what the conditions we're expecting at Arrowhead are not supposed to be bad. You get arguably the best 2 quarterbacks in the league. It's not that difficult to score points, even on good defenses, when you have really good quarterback play. So I do expect to see both offenses play well in this game.
And I went ahead and rewatched the final 2 minutes of the fourth quarter plus overtime of that thrilling divisional round game between these two teams in the same setting a couple years ago. If I recall correctly offhand, 31 points after the 2-minute warning of the fourth quarter. Obviously, that is the outlier of all outlier scenarios. But to your point, these are dynamic quarterbacks with good enough weapons against defenses that are not unstoppable enough that it's not out of the realm of possibility to see points in a hurry at some stretch on Sunday. So glad to hear that it sounds like at least between 2 games, 2 point spreads and 2 totals, there seems to be something actionable if you're reading between the lines when it comes to the total in the AFC Championship game. And Rob, if you have anything else full game wise, let me know. Otherwise, I'd be happy to throw one prop angle your way for the AFC title game as well.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, Matt, like, I'm not stupid. This is a very efficient market at this point in the year as well. This is just a personal take of mine where, I mean, I'm a little bit off on what I make the total. And if this was a regular season game, I mean, chances are I would not even be considering betting a marginal difference like that on the total. But I do see some upside, and I probably will play some alternate overs in this game because you put 2 great quarterbacks together. I mean, you look at last week between Baltimore and Buffalo, right? Baltimore's offense was extremely efficient on this Buffalo defense, with the exception of they didn't punt in the game. The Ravens did not punt a single time. It was turnovers that did them in. Buffalo, even for a very lackluster offensive performance, in my opinion, they still end up putting up 27 points in that game. I mean, Buffalo's floor has kind of been mid-20s now, going on 2.5 months. So I think alternate overs are worth a look in this game. I think there's some potential scenarios where you do see like crazy scoring down the stretch, back and forth. That's well within the range of outcomes.
Something else I think is well within the range of outcomes is a prop angle I'll go ahead and share right now. And that's a bet I'm seeing at one shop right now. It's no roughing the passer penalty to be called against Buffalo at -220. Now, I'll note, again, this is at one book I'm seeing right now. It caters to rec bettors, so I don't want to belabor the point, but it's by far my favorite bet I've seen so far this week. And based on the news cycle with the officiating, I would recommend keeping an eye out for it just in case other books post it as well as kickoff approaches. I think the clear factor here could be recency bias. As we touched on earlier, multiple questionable calls against Houston last week, including a roughing the passer flag that turned a punt into points for Kansas City. But if we zoom out beyond last week, the referee in this game is going to be Clete Blakeman. And the first headline I saw when the assignments were announced was that Blakeman's crew called the most penalties per game in the league this season. That sounds like a problem for this prop if we're betting the no on roughing the passer to be called against Buffalo. But in 16 games this season, Blakeman flagged roughing the passer 4 times. So on average, let's say there's a 25% chance he calls it Sunday, and about half the time that would go against Kansas City. So if we want to conservatively say there's about a 15% chance Buffalo gets flagged for roughing the passer. If we translate that to American odds, we're looking at a 15% probability, equating minus 570. So at a price point of minus 220, the odds imply a 31% chance Buffalo gets flagged for roughing the passer. And yes, Mahomes in Kansas City are known to get the benefit of the doubt. But if I can quote Captain Jack Andrews here, this strikes me as a bridge too far. And one more stat for good measure. I know I've thrown a lot of numbers out here, and I'll get to a qualitative angle shortly. But Buffalo, 0 flags on their defense for roughing the passer in 19 games so far this season, including one against Mahomes in Kansas City. One last thing here, a free roll to bookend the handicap. If anything, I feel like the criticism around the officiating last week has some calling into question the integrity of the game. And I would just as soon argue that could make Blakeman more hesitant than usual and have him on high alert for Mahomes flopping, like we also saw last week, that could result in a reduced likelihood that we see roughing the passer called in the Chiefs' favor this week. So I do want to get out the disclaimer that anything can happen. Please manage your bankroll accordingly if you decide to get involved here. But I see minus 220. I'd play it up to 400 fairly comfortably. I know it's a bit of a narrative with a lot of math built in, Rob. What are your thoughts on Buffalo not to get flagged for roughing the passer at the current price of minus 220?
Well, when you first said it, Matt, my initial reaction was this guy is insane for wanting to take this bet. And as you've gone through it, it logically makes a lot more sense to me. Listen, this is not something I regularly handicap, so I'm not aware of the frequency in which that's called. My biggest hesitation would be, for one, you have a high blitzing defensive coordinator in Steve Spagnuolo for Kansas City. I think Josh Allen's going to take a lot of hits in this game, and I don't know how that's going to go. On the Chiefs side of things, I do agree with your narrative. I think that there, might be like a little quiet memo that goes around this week of like, let's make sure we're getting the right calls on these quarterback type of hits going into the game. So I like the angle. I can't say I'm going to tail this one like I'm going to tail the SGP though.
Very fair. And if it helps to clarify, because I know it was a bit of a long windup to toss it to you, the minus 220 price point is specifically on Buffalo to get penalized for roughing Mahomes. It's not for it to be flagged in the game as a whole. I know a lot of times when we get to the Super Bowl, there's just a yes or no, will roughing the passer get called in the game? And when both teams are on the table there, if I can find that at minus 120 or better, I consider it to be a slam dunk. But if I can isolate just one team at minus 220, I think given the recent news cycle, that's why this is being offered. And I think people may be overreacting, hence the value I saw on this not getting flagged against the Bills.
Yeah, 100%. It's the fade the narrative type of bet where pretty much anyone who sees this type of prop is going to lay the yes. It's very, very similar to Super Bowl handicapping as well. Okay, from that perspective, makes a lot more sense to me. I still can't bet it, but it makes a lot more sense to me.
Fair enough. And even if you wanted to bet it, I realize again, right now it's only at one book, so maybe you couldn't unless you know somebody. But feel free to keep an eye out if you're listening to this and it happens to pop up at other books as kickoff approaches. Rob, I think that takes us through these games one by one, but I feel like we can also work in a brief teaser segment this week because surprisingly there is a bit of intrigue given this is just a 2-game slate and the AFC title game. Buffalo makes a lot of sense if you don't like the Chiefs, just taking the Bills up from +2 to +8. A natural fit, crossing through those key numbers of 3 and 7. In the NFC Championship game, we might need to get a bit creative, but you could pair Buffalo with the Eagles coming down to pick them. The rationale there would be that while the Eagles represent a non-wog teaser leg since we're not crossing through 7, if we use the money line as a reference point in 2-team 6-point teasers at minus 120, you're laying about minus 285 in each leg. Last I saw, the Eagles on the money line were minus 280 at Circa and Bookmaker. That's right up against the minus 285 threshold. So we're really close there, maybe just splitting hairs. I will note the hesitation I have here. We talked about injuries to Philadelphia on both sides of the ball. That can introduce some unwanted variance. Yeah. Washington's 4th down approach can add some even more variance. And teasers inherently bets against variance. So I'm kind of on the fence here. Love the Buffalo number, but it takes 2 to tango. Ultimately, Rob, any thoughts on a teaser involving Buffalo +8 at Kansas City paired with Philadelphia Pick'em hosting Washington?
I think the point you made at the end there is my reluctance to play something like that. I think Philadelphia, Washington, I mean, you could kind of wait to see what the closing line is in this game. And to your point, the math would make sense around minus 285 in terms of a money line. But I don't think this is not the game where the market is going to be its most efficient because of the injury uncertainty on the Philadelphia side. And I pretty much like to avoid games like that if I'm teasing, unless I'm taking the opposite side in that particular game. And I don't think, Washington's not providing the value at that point. So for me, you definitely want to minimize variance as much as possible if you're going to play the 2-game teasers or any teaser. And to me, that Philadelphia game is just a very wide range of outcomes.
All right, we'll go ahead and pass on that teaser for now, but we've got plenty in play when it comes to the props. Now, Rob, let's go ahead and weave in the hops. I know this time of year, dry January, a popular trend, and full disclosure, I'm firmly supportive of anybody who wants to do it. And if you are, the end is in sight. It's just not for me. I talked with Ed last week and shared on Twitter some of my preferred alternatives. I would consider taking a dry month between the Super Bowl and March Madness, or maybe a dry week once a quarter, or a dry weekend once a month. Ultimately, things that could have a similar effect to dry January without having an impact on my enjoyment of the NFL playoffs. What's your perspective on dry January and perhaps any of these similar alternatives out there?
Yeah, I think it could be like a really powerful reset button for a lot of people. I echo your sentiment, Matt. For me, January comes, people set their New Year's resolutions. They want to get healthier. They want to go to the gym. I mean, the gyms are packed right now in January. 2 weeks from now, they're going to be empty again because some people will be giving up on that. But it's the same thing with dry January. It's just like an arbitrary endpoint. I hate arbitrary endpoints. Now, that's not to say you can't do it or you shouldn't do it. Actually, I would encourage you to put your health first in as many situations as possible. Go into it with the right mindset and things of that nature. But for me, I mean, I'm not practicing a dry January. And if I was going to, I would probably do it at a time of year that does make a little bit more sense to me. And just kind of see what my reaction is to that, whether I thought it improved my life. Moderation is always great. I'm not going to, again, poo-poo the idea, but it's arbitrary endpoint. So it's not my thing.
And understanding that it's not your thing with Conference Championship Sunday and Super Sunday in the sights, is there anything specific that you have set aside in the fridge or anything that you would typically turn to for some of those elevated game day experiences when the stakes are at their highest at the end of the NFL season?
Yeah, so Championship Sunday will be like the most inebriated I will be at any point over the course of the year because it's the one day a year that I watch football with all of my friends, my childhood friends. It's just like that's the day everyone plans around it. So it'll get pretty rowdy. I'm very much into the seltzers now, to be honest with you. They're more of a diabetes friendly drink for me. I'm type 1 diabetic. It's very hard to manage when you're drinking a lot of beer or a lot of alcohol. I really enjoy High Noons. It's my go-to even in winter, just because of the low carb content. And I can pound those back, but I don't know what's going to be in store this Sunday because you get a bunch of 35 to 40-year-old males together. And everyone's bringing their own type of booze. Could be in for anything this week. Lots of surprises on the table, Matt.
And speaking of potential surprises on the table, Rob, I think that gives us a natural bridge to hop into the Malinsky Minute. I'm going to go ahead and steal a page from the Circles Off playbook and run through a plus EV and minus EV move of the week with you. Also looking at this as a tribute to Dave's well-roundedness, knowing that you guys on the show have often talked about this outside the realm of plus EV or minus EV bets specifically. So, Rob, if we want to lead off with you, I've got no idea what's in store, but how would you describe your plus EV move of this week?
Yeah, so I recently watched one of my favorite childhood movies, which is Happy Gilmore, and there's a part where Chubbs is trying to get Happy Adam Sandler in the right mindset, and he tells him like, go to your happy place, right? And this is like it's a little bit corny, but I think everybody needs to really find their happy place. And for me, I spend a lot of time behind a desk. A lot of it, especially sports betting, can be high anxiety, stress. There are times where you just need to be able to find a reset, and having something that you can go to that consistently calms you down or just gets you in a better state of mind is something that I could highly recommend or should highly recommend for other people out there. For me, I like to put on a pair of noise canceling headphones, go into a dark room, listen to music. Every now and then I'll pull up the lyrics for it as well, because I barely ever pay attention to lyrics. Sometimes I sing the wrong lyrics to songs as I'm actually singing it. So it just gives me like a kind of a refresh. And I think that's really important for people, just to find something that gives them that reset where they can calm down and get into a better state of mind. So yeah, a little bit cheesy, but I did see that recently, and I was going to use it on my own show, but I'll use it here for you, Matt. Find something that can give you a mental refresh, somewhere where you can go to your happy place.
Yeah, if it's cheesy, then I too am guilty as charged, because while we didn't rehearse this, I think there's a lot of overlap between the plus EV moves we went with. Mine would be selectively not watching games where you have bets on the line. Maybe there's a bit of a connection where you had one to Happy Gilmore, for me to Billy Bean as portrayed by Brad Pitt in Moneyball, where he just doesn't want to watch any games unfolding live with so much on the line. I feel like sometimes that can be the better move as far as mental health goes. An example I'll share: this past Sunday, I had a bet on the Eagles -2.5 in the first quarter. My wife wanted to go shoe shopping, so we left the house almost immediately after that game kicked off. And instead of sweating the bet by listening on the radio when we're driving to the store or following it on my phone while it was in progress, we listened to a Spotify playlist I made with recordings of live classic rock. And by the way, I think it featured plenty of songs Dave would have approved of featuring in the jukebox from his legendary Point Blank column. I recall an epic version of Bohemian Rhapsody live at Wembley Stadium in 1986, as well as a great Zac Brown Band cover of Baba O'Reilly from Fenway Park in August of 2016. Overall here, I'll say it put me in a better headspace, whether the bet ended up winning or losing, especially after I realized I dodged quite the roller coaster ride. I couldn't help looking up the play-by-play after the fact. So the Eagles scored a touchdown on their opening drive, which was great. Then Jake Elliott misses the extra point. Not as great. The Rams' opening drive, an apparent 3-and-out, and then a third down incompletion, overturned for a first down. Fine, it's the right call. Rams keep the ball. Same drive, they convert a fourth down. They score a touchdown on a 3rd and goal, equating to a 4-point swing. Just over a minute left, down by 1 with the Eagles. Things are looking bleak. And then Saquon rips off a 62-yard touchdown run. Maybe another note to think twice before betting him under this week. But that explosive run by Saquon seemingly put the Eagles' first quarter bet in the bag, only for the Rams to then hit a big pass play early on their next drive to get into the red zone. Thankfully, that ended up being the final play of the first quarter. The bet ended up coming home. But first and foremost, I think my takeaway from all that was betting a secondary priority, like a first quarter Eagles wager. I can miss that if it means I get quality time with loved ones for more time than I typically would when NFL games are being played. Admittedly, I'm a constant work in progress when it comes to living this out more consistently. But I also find there to be a degree of karma that sometimes when I properly prioritize something else or someone else and break away from my bets, the results tend to take care of themselves in a funny way. Maybe it's just my selective attention span, but it reminds me of a classic line by Michael Scott in The Office: I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. So, Rob, how would you describe your personal point of view when it comes to watching or not watching as some of your bets are unfolding?
Yeah, I think that's really healthy. I mean, naturally, we are conditioned as bettors to always think the worst when we're watching games. So either, the bet is not going in your favor and you have a lot of stress and anxiety when you're watching a bet not going in your favor, or things are working out in your favor and you're starting to think about how things cannot work out in your favor as the game goes on. And there's that pessimistic mindset that most bettors have. There's a lot of studies on this as well. So if you think about it from that lens, and most people who are going to watch a bet in action are going to be under a lot of stress when doing so, I think that's a very healthy plus EV move. And I rarely watch bets that or games that I have big bets on. I strayed from that many years ago for that exact reason.
Yeah, if somebody is a diehard fan of a team and their bet is just a small piece of their overall rooting interest, I don't want to try to dissuade anybody from following their heart and enjoying the precious few games we get in a season. But selectively, I think that can make all the difference. And Rob, while we had some good alignment on our plus EV moves of the week, curious as to what we'll get with minus EV moves of the week. Go ahead and take it away first.
All right. So recently, I've been going back and forth with Steve Fezzik on Twitter because of his disdain for Starbucks and his love for Dunkin'. And I was kind of doing some year-end finances and record keeping, some personal stuff. And I said to myself, I'm going to go and look at how much money I spent on coffee last year. And listen, I'm not like a Starbucks purist. I'll get coffee anywhere, really, whatever's most convenient. But when I did the final tally, I got to tell you, it's actually insane how much money I spent on coffee. And when you're buying something that's only a couple bucks at a time, you do not realize how quickly it can add up over a long period of time. I have a very good coffee maker at home, could easily brew myself a coffee in a minute or two, yet I constantly go out. And you should be very conscious of that when it comes to really small purchases and how they can add up over time. I know this is a very small but relatable decision that people can laugh at, but there's like an insane amount of value that I've lost by just being lazy. And I think just having that perspective on things is very important nowadays, because we can lose that easily. Oh, this thing's $1, this thing's $2. And then you start adding it up. You're getting multiple coffees a day. And before you know it, you're spending an insane amount over the course of the year. So do not replicate the Rob Pizzola move. Don't get lazy. A lot of times it's actually much more worth it in the long run to spend that extra 1 or 2 minutes on something, because the cost can really add up over time.
When you first started talking about coffee, I was thinking, all right, we're not going to have any alignment here, because while I love the smell of coffee, I've never had a cup of coffee in my life. And then you talked about small things adding up over time and the way that incremental bits of laziness can really accumulate. I think there is, in some sense, quite a correlation with our minus EV moves as well, because mine is the snooze button. And I admittedly have used it much more than I should have recently, working on correcting it, trusting that the upside of a few more minutes of less than great sleep, rarely, if ever, worth the downside of disrupting your schedule and starting your day behind the curve. And from personal experience, when I snooze, the first thing to go is quality time with my wife. I mean, something's got to give. I have the same number of hours in a day, still have just as much work to do, so free time gets cut short at the end of the day. And that's not only a bad decision for me, but it's extremely unfair to her. And I'm lucky beyond measure that she wants to spend quality time with me in the first place. She has a mantra in which I firmly believe: you never regret waking up early. And to that, I would add, it doesn't even have to be early. I would just say that whatever time you set your alarm for when you're of sound mind the day or night before, that's probably worth sticking to, as opposed to negotiating with yourself when you're in a mental fog significant enough to think that a few more minutes in bed is a good idea. Lastly here, I think few things are better than winning the morning. It really increases my confidence and has me feel like I'm playing offense rather than defense with the rest of my day. And tying this in with the Malinsky Minute, when Dave would appear years ago on Follow the Money on VSiN with Mitch and Polly during the eerie pre-dawn hours in Vegas, they would sometimes ask him why he was up so early to be on their show in the first place. And his response was, I like to win. So it's easier said than done. But my takeaway from that is that winners wake up early. Rob, all that said, your thoughts and perhaps your own personal habits when it comes to that polarizing snooze button.
I am a snoozer. I would wish that I wasn't in life. I set my alarm an hour before I actually wake up every single day, because in my head, I love the feeling of waking up and knowing that I can still sleep for another hour. It's really hard to describe that. However, there are numerous studies that show you're not getting a good sleep by doing that. You might as well just wake up right when you get up, because you don't fall into a deep sleep again. Also, I'm married just like you, Matt, and the wife she's not a fan of it. So that could possibly lead to marital issues down the road as well. So I'm with you. That's good advice. I need to get away from that. I haven't been able to successfully do it yet, but I hope to be able to accomplish that at some point in life.
Yeah, certainly one of those things that is easier said than done, but at the top of my radar right now. And Rob, I would say something that's not easier said than done. Following the good work that you're doing just about everywhere good sports betting content can be found. This audience can find it across the Hammer, Bet Stamp, Circles Off, Forward Progress, As we round the corner here, I want to turn it over to you to share anything you would like about what's in store with your current and near-term future content that people can find, again, just about anywhere these days.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of the Hammer Betting Network, and I do appear on a few of our channels if you want to check them out. Circles Off is one. Circles Off is more of an educational and lifestyle gambling brand. We do have an educational show called Circles Off, which is mostly interviews with industry experts. We have a very big one dropping tomorrow. To my knowledge, this person hasn't been interviewed anywhere yet, so I think that will be something that people want to tune into. Also, we have Circle Back as part of that channel, which is more of a weekend review of gambling Twitter. Think about it as the View for sports. So those are a couple big ones. On the Forward Progress YouTube channel, that is our NFL division of the Hammer. Regular content going out there. If you're going to be big into Super Bowl prop betting, we will be doing a 5-hour Super Bowl props live show this year. More details on that to come, but you can just go over to Forward Progress on YouTube, click subscribe, turn on notifications, and lots of content till the end of the year, Matt.
And I know we're going to be on edge for more details. One detail that I've got to press you for at this point, when it comes to that 5-hour Super Bowl stream, any bathroom breaks built in this year?
Probably yes. We're going to at least build a bumper just in case I have to leave for like a minute or two. But yes, I'm going to have to do that. I cannot hold my pee for very long. Part of that is because of the amount of coffee that I drink over the course of the day, which is a natural diuretic. So yes, we're going to have to do that. I can't sit for 5 hours without a pee break from noon to 5. Not going to happen.
Yeah, well, I can only imagine what it must be like undertaking a 5-hour live stream. So glad to hear that there's going to be some safeguard built in. Again, more details to come. We will go ahead and wrap up. Rob, I want to thank the audience for tuning in. One more reminder to check out his work just about everywhere, including The Hammer, BetStamp, Circles Off, Forward Progress, on Twitter at Rob Pizzola. Thank you to Hector, Zev, Arkle, everybody tuning in, commenting in the chat throughout the course of this conversation. Hector, also a great note. Plus, EB is learning how to wake up without an alarm at all. Mm-hmm. I aspire to be that person. First few hazy minutes, then getting completely lost when you're rushed getting up. Don't touch your phone right away either. Yeah, I think one day maybe I'll be that person. I'm not there yet, but we are all a work in progress. Rob, thanks again for your time and insight over the course of this conversation. Look forward to seeing what's in store with all the great content you continue to crank out, and best of luck this weekend.
Thanks, Matt. Good luck to you as well.